and we're sitting here together. We are pleased to have the support of our director, Dr. Rose Masha, who is contributing valuable guidance to our work. Please note that the views and perspective we share today in this research do not represent the official policies or regulatory position of the CHE. Then also important to note is that our research is still at the early stages, and we welcome your insights, feedback, and perspective to help us to redefine and expand the study further. Going to the next slide.
Yeah, we're moving.
The background and rationale of our research. Gen AI rise in higher education is driven by models like ChatGPT that stimulate human-like thinking and writing. It's valuable for its ability to personalize learning, automate routine tasks, and enhance creativity in teaching and research. And some of those examples are custom learning materials, instant formative feedback, and supporting lecturers and with content generation, which is one of the positives part of it. However, it also introduces some challenges around academic integrity, plagiarism, and ethical accountability. Therefore, institutions must implement thoughtful and ensuring that AI enhances rather than replaces human intelligence and maintains the integrity of learning. The goal to integrate Gen AI as a partner in education, not to substitute for critical human judgment. That is the angle that we're coming with, me and Donald. Donald will take the objectives in the next slide, and I'll speak to the aims. This study is driven by the rapid adoption of Gen AI across universities, private higher education institutions in South Africa. Despite the growing use, institutional responses have been fragmented. In our research, we found out that with some leading policy development, while others are still lagging behind. Therefore, the aim of this study is to provide an analysis on how institutions are positioning themselves through policy and governance framework. Dee will speak to the objectives.
Yes, so the objective of our presentation is therefore to share our analysis of institutional policies as well as guidelines, thereby sharing the identified patterns of convergence and divergence there, as well as the gaps and the risks that we found or identified in those policy and guidelines documents. And our methodology was a qualitative one, where we did document analysis of publicly available institutional policies and guidelines. And we applied convenience sampling, where we sourced 33 documents from both public and private higher education institutions. And these were published in the last 3 years. And then with this document, we coded that, used open coding to identify the themes, as well as Excel coding to relate the key themes.
Looking at the key themes, these are the areas that the policies addressed. So each of these themes reflect how institutions are approaching the integration of Gen AI in teaching, learning, and research. These policies cover several important areas, but however, I won't go into all the details here. Donald will take you through the key themes in the next slide. Dee?
Thank you, Phumi. So the first theme that we looked at was policy and intent. And there we asked ourselves, what is it that the policies or guidelines are trying to achieve? And what we found was that most institutions' policies and guidelines are trying to enable the responsible use of AI. So they are actively encouraging it and providing some guidance on how to use it. However, there are still some institutions that adopt a defensive posture where they restrict the use of AI, or they are very strong on the use of detection rather than thinking about how can we redesign our assessment and so forth. We should also point out that yes, these are the kind of two that we found where some are kind of encouraging it, some are more defensive on it, but we also found that some institutions are silent on the matter. So they do not yet have some or have policies or guidelines for students and so forth. Yeah, it's understandable. It's something that has developed in the last few years, and yeah, some institutions really take time to respond to that. And the second theme that we looked at was how are they dealing with the issue of assessments and learning design. And we found that there is a strong trend towards the need to redesign assessment, to rethink assessment in such a way that assessments demonstrate human understanding and process rather than focusing on policing output and things like that. And yeah, several of these documents still suggest that institutions rely on detectors and proctoring systems rather than training the students and guiding them on how to use it and use it responsibly and so forth. And linked to that is the issue of authorship and citation, which was one of the things that we also looked at. There is a widespread agreement that is found on most of this, or on this document, that AI cannot be listed as an author in scholarly work. And they offer several guidelines to specify how AI contributions must be acknowledged. And I must say, this is important because there is a confusion somehow between citation and acknowledgement, at least from student perspective, where they feel that, I used AI, therefore I need to cite AI. And we should also say that there is kind of also some disagreements among academics, among institutions, where some say that, yeah, you can cite AI, but most of them says you can't. So it's also one of the areas that maybe needs to be clarified. Can you or can you not cite AI? The issue of disclosure links to the previous theme. Disclosure is one of the baseline expectations that we found on this guideline document. So in other words, students are encouraged to disclose whenever they use AI. But as I indicated previously, it is sometimes confusing to a student. How do I disclose this? Do I disclose this through citation? Do I disclose this through acknowledgement? And if so, how? There's that question of how do I do that? We know ChatGPT, for example, is not it's not a published scholar as such. So how will you cite it and so forth? So it creates a bit of a problem there. But from a policy perspective or from the guidelines, they emphasize a lot of accountability and transparency whenever you use this. And they require some form of declaration and acknowledgement, even if there is no form of agreement in terms of exactly how are you going to acknowledge it. Yeah. And the other thing that we looked at was literacy and capacity building and support. Most of them do recognize the need for staff and student development and support in relation to these, but there are gaps as well in terms of resources, and this sometimes create problems. For example, now I want to make example with the use of the paid softwares and the free ones. Yeah, it creates an access issue where the students that are able to pay, they are sometimes able to produce better outputs compared to the ones that use the free version. So issues of access and all of that comes in there. Hence, support was one of the themes there. And the other things that which this policies covered was the issue of the POPIA Act, compliance with the POPI Act, ensuring that guiding the students not to disclose confidential information, and also to be worried about some third-party services making sure that they do not expose sensitive information and so forth. So these are the areas that these policies cover. Oh, yes, we have also governance and accountability. And yes, earlier on we indicated that most of these institutions or that we sampled, they either encourage, most of them, and a few of them are restricting the use of AI, and they've done that through the establishment of policies and guidelines. But there are many students, not students, but rather many institutions which are silent on the matter, at least from a public perspective, where their position on the use of generative AI is not known or is not clear to the people outside, but possibly to the students as well. And other institutions still rely on academic integrity policies and student regulations rather than having standalone policies and so forth. So they're not broad enough, they're not clear enough in terms of what is it that they're trying to achieve and how should AI be used within that institutions and so forth. Phumi?
Thank you, Donald. Under the cross-cutting patterns, these policies, when you look at them broadly, these are the areas that they are trying to address. Under disclosure, we will learn that there's the disclosure is becoming a sector-wide baseline, and institutions are increasingly require students and staff to declare. And I think Donald also mentioned this when they're using the AI tool. And under assessment redesign, I think Donald also alluded on this. They prioritize a creativity, human-centered task, and over-reliance on AI detectors. So the authenticity by design is also a factor to look at when redesigning assessments. And under AI literacy, this one is also gaining attention with universities investing in staff and student capacity, building to promote a responsible and informed use. Because we also learned that some students are not informed, they're not aware about the consequences of using AI unethically. And privacy and secure tooling, these are guided by POPIA compliance. So one of the good things is that it ensures that there's ethical data management when using AI platforms. So there's privacy is protected. The government structures as well, such as AI committees and policy frameworks, are emerging to oversee the implementation, ethics, and the accountability for institutions. We also looked at gaps and risks. Okay, under the gaps, when we're looking at this information or data that was available before us, we learned that there's policy unevenness and issues vary widely. They're not doing the same things, so there's a variety there. Some have mature frameworks, others lack formal guidance. So there's also over reliance on AI detectors. We found that it has came a lot in the data that we received. And this raises risk of false positives and inequity. Under equity, talking of equity concerns, there's also unequal access to premium AI tools, which may disadvantage some students because they're not equal. Then there's also a point of staff readiness. There's limited professional development in other institutions and shared standards across the sector. It also came in out that some lecturers, as much as they want to come up with creative assessments, however, they're not developed, they don't know how to do that. Data privacy gaps also came in. There's inconsistent understanding of POPIA compliance in the use of AI. And the last one is the fragmentation. Absence of a unified sector-wide approach reduces coherence and accountability when using AI.
Yes.
Okay, imaging on good practices. There's a focus on human-centered approach where process-based evaluation rather than AI detection is recommended. Disclosure also is part of what we have noticed as a good practice. There's clear policies that require students and staff to declare when using AI and in their assessment and research. There's also an issue of confidentiality that came in as a good practice, that data privacy will be protected by POPIA. And professional development, there's ongoing AI literacy and staff training initiatives that came out in the policies that we looked at. And now we'll go to our recommendations. Looking at the time, it looks like it's not on our side. These are some of the recommendations that me and Donald came with. We thought it will be good if we there's a development of national Gen AI policy framework in higher education so that there can be a uniform approach. And the second one is create a disclosure guidelines. As Donald has alluded about the citation and stuff, it's not clear to students and to staff when you have to disclose. How will there be maybe a unified form or maybe a guideline on disclosure to students and staff? Ensure that there's equity and access, maybe to have one AI tool that is accessible to all students. So there's more like a neutral way of accessing it. Maybe they can make it accessible, buy it for students to access. And another one, Donald is pushing me here, he's panicking with time, colleagues. They promote AI literacy and staff development. This is also close to my heart. Like I said, lecturers, they are willing to come up with advanced and creative assessments. However, some they don't know how, and students, some they're innocently using AI unethically. So there's a need for development there. And the last recommendation is to establish institutional AI governance committees and policies.
Thank you, colleagues. Yes, this is what we found when we looked at the policies and the guidelines from the institutions, trying to understand what is their policy positions, what guidelines do they offer to students, where do they agree with each other, and where is there some convergence in their policies as well as the risk identified in there. We welcome questions and comments if time allows, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Donald and Phumzile. This is very valuable. Just monitoring the chat. Dr. Rose, see your hand is up.
Thank you, colleagues, and thank you so much for attending our session. The one comment I wanted to add in terms of the recommendations was that as much as the first recommendation speaks about a national framework, but that framework would have to understand the differentiation within HEIs. So it wouldn't, we're not talking about a framework that is not flexible, but that one that understands that HEIs, public HEIs within themselves are different, and then private HEIs within themselves are different. So we're talking about a very contextualized approach. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Dr. Rose.
Thank you, Dr. Rose. Just something from my side, I liked the point you made about equity and access, and I definitely agree that we are seeing detection tools increasingly catching students who cannot afford to pay for tools such as undetectable AI, which a person could use to humanize AI-generated content. And you mentioned some institutions taking on a defensive stance while others are quiet. And I was just thinking when you mentioned that, are institutions even allowed to be silent and not take a side, like to be on the fence?
I don't know if I can respond to them being allowed, but what I can definitely respond to is that, as Dr. Rose has said, institutions are not the same from contextual perspective. There are those institutions that are able to respond very quickly to the demands of AI and all of that, but there are institutions as well that are they're lacking behind because of maybe their nature, their size, and all of that. The capacities within these institutions is not the same. One institution can take 6 months to develop a policy and guideline and all of that. The other one might take years to do so because of the context in which each institution is situated.
And just to add on that, some institutions, maybe they are waiting for that framework, like a guideline that will show them as to how to go about developing such. So that could be maybe another reason. And some, they are quiet because in our research, we couldn't find any, hence we're saying they are quiet. It could be that it was not accessible in our disposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phumzile and Donald. Again, I'm just checking the chat. There's nothing new coming through. Colleagues, you're welcome to open your mic or maybe use the chat box to ask a question or add something. We are just a minute away from our 5-minute break before Denise and Angus take over. Dr. Rose?
Thank you, colleagues. As we are speaking so much about this, we're all trying to understand and navigate through the whole Gen AI. And I think a big part of it is always linked to assessment and credibility. So at some point, I think as HEIs, we need to maybe rethink how we assess. Our whole assessment would need to possibly be targeted at fitting in with the current practices of AI. And I think that's where we're struggling, because we want to hold on to traditional norms of assessment, but then now we're actually moving forward. Thank you, colleagues.
Thanks, Dr. Masha. Something that you also mentioned, Phumzile and Donald, is authenticity by design. And I was just thinking that, again, we have so many tools working against this. It feels like it's not foolproof. Any thoughts on that, colleagues? Donald, Phumzile, anyone in the participants
Well,
list who wants something?
it's a very tricky one. It's a very tricky one, Lee. As you say, this is a moving target. It's a moving target. You design your assessment in this way today. Tomorrow there is a tool to work against it. The very same way that the detectors work. Today they can catch AI written work. Tomorrow they can't, because there's improvement in that. But we need to keep on trying to find ways to be even more authentic, to constantly rethink. But as to how, the question of how is a very broad one, and possibly one that is, requires context requires context for each person.
Thanks so much, Donald, for your responses, and Phumzile as well. The presentation was very insightful. There's nothing in the chat, and I think we'll just take the next 4 minutes to set up with Denise and Angus for the next presentation. We really appreciate you joining us today. Thank you.